"I'm sorry, sir, but I can't help you with your request today. My transmission seems to be acting up and I've got 3 other customers ahead of you anyway." The mechanic barely looked up from his coffee cup, his tone dismissive and cold. 78-year-old Master Sergeant Robert Chen, a decorated Vietnam War veteran and Purple Heart recipient, stood quietly in the cramped garage office, clutching his car keys in one weathered hand and a small envelope containing his last paycheck in the other. His old sedan had broken down just 2 miles from the Veterans Hospital, where he volunteered every Tuesday reading to wounded soldiers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Today was different though. Today he needed to get there because he had promised young Private Martinez, who had lost both legs in Afghanistan, that he would be there for his first attempt at walking with prosthetics. Robert had specifically chosen this auto repair shop because it was the closest one to the hospital and time was running short. What the mechanic didn't know was that in just a few minutes, a small military badge would slip from Robert's worn jacket pocket and everything in that room would change forever. Robert Chen had lived a life that most people could barely imagine. Born in 1947 to Chinese immigrants who had fled the turmoil in their homeland, he grew up in a small apartment above his family's laundromat in San Francisco's Chinatown. His parents worked 18-hour days 7 days a week, scrubbing clothes and pressing shirts so their only son could have opportunities they never had. Robert excelled in school despite the language barriers at home and the occasional racism he faced on the streets. When he turned 8 in 1965, the Vietnam War was escalating and young men across America were being drafted. Robert could have easily obtained a deferment for college, but something deep inside him felt a calling to serve the country that had given his family refuge and hope. He enlisted in the Army in the spring of 1966 and after basic training was assigned to the 1st Infantry Division. Robert's natural mechanical aptitude quickly became apparent and he was trained as a helicopter mechanic, specializing in the maintenance of Huey helicopters that were the lifeline for troops in remote fire bases throughout South Vietnam. His job was dangerous beyond measure. He often had to work on damaged aircraft under enemy fire, and his quick thinking and steady hands saved countless lives by keeping those helicopters flying when others said they couldn't be fixed. During his second tour in Vietnam in 1968, Robert's forward operating base came under intense attack during the Tet Offensive. Enemy forces had surrounded their position and ammunition was running critically low. The only helicopter that could evacuate the wounded had taken multiple hits and was deemed unflyable by the pilot. Robert crawled under heavy enemy fire to reach the damaged aircraft, with bullets whistling overhead and mortar rounds exploding. Around him he worked for over an hour replacing damaged hydraulic lines and patching fuel leaks using nothing but spare parts and incredible determination. When he finally got the helicopter running, 3 critically wounded soldiers were loaded aboard, including a young medic who had lost his arm trying to save others. As the helicopter lifted off, Robert realized he had been hit by shrapnel in his left shoulder and back, but he had been so focused on the repair work that he hadn't even noticed. That helicopter made it safely back to base, and all 3 wounded soldiers survived. For his actions that day, Robert was awarded the Purple Heart and the Bronze Star with V device for valor. The citation read in part that his selfless dedication to duty and exceptional mechanical skill under extreme combat conditions exemplified the highest traditions of military service. After completing his 3rd tour, Robert returned home to San Francisco in 1970. Like many Vietnam veterans, he found that the country he had served was deeply divided about the war, and soldiers were often met with protests rather than gratitude. Robert didn't let the cold reception discourage him. He used his GI Bill benefits to study mechanical engineering and opened his own small auto repair shop in 1975, For over 40 years, he built a reputation as the most honest and skilled mechanic in the neighborhood. He never overcharged customers and often did free work for single mothers, elderly people, and other veterans who were struggling financially. Robert's wife Maria, whom he had married in 1974, passed away from cancer in 2018 after 44 years of marriage. They never had children, but Maria had always supported Robert's quiet acts of service to others. After her death, Robert sold his auto repair shop and began volunteering full-time at the Veterans Hospital. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he would drive to the hospital to read to patients, play chess with lonely veterans, and help new amputees learn to navigate their daily challenges. He found that his own experiences with trauma and his natural mechanical problem-solving skills made him particularly good at helping other veterans adapt to prosthetic limbs and mobility devices. The veteran that Robert was supposed to meet today, Private First Class Miguel Martinez, was only 22 years old. Miguel had stepped on an improvised explosive device during a patrol in Afghanistan and lost both legs above the knee. He had been struggling with depression and had refused to work with the physical therapists until Robert started visiting him 3 weeks ago. Something about Robert's quiet confidence and the way he talked about overcoming challenges had reached Miguel in a way that the professional counselors couldn't. Today was going to be Miguel's first attempt at walking with his new prosthetic legs, and he had specifically asked if Robert could be there to watch and encourage him. Robert had woken up early that morning and carefully pressed his one good shirt. He had put on his small Vietnam service pin that Maria had given him for their 10th wedding anniversary and placed his Purple Heart medal in a small felt pouch in his jacket pocket. He didn't usually carry the medal with him, but today felt special, and he thought it might give Miguel some inspiration to see that recovery was possible. His old sedan had started making strange noises the week before, but Robert was living on a small pension and Social Security and couldn't afford major repairs. He had been hoping the car would last long enough to get him through Miguel's rehabilitation process. When the car finally broke down just 2 miles from the hospital, Robert felt a deep sense of disappointment. He called several taxi companies, but none were available for at least an hour. The city bus route would take 90 minutes and require 2 transfers. Robert was not the kind of man to give up easily, so he decided to walk to the nearest auto repair shop and see if someone could at least give him a quick temporary fix to get the car running long enough to reach the hospital. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Diamond Auto Repair was located in a rundown strip mall between a check cashing store and a fast food restaurant. The building looked like it hadn't been painted in 20 years, and the parking lot was cracked and filled with potholes. Robert hesitated for a moment, wondering if this was the kind of place that would take advantage of an elderly customer, but he was running out of time and options. He pushed open the glass door, which was covered with handwritten signs advertising various services and prices. The waiting area was small and cramped with mismatched plastic chairs and a coffee table covered with old automotive magazines. Air smelled of motor oil, cigarette smoke, and something that might have been air freshener, but wasn't quite covering up less pleasant odors. Behind a scratched plexiglass partition sat a man in his early 30s wearing a grease-stained uniform shirt with the name Eddie embroidered above the left pocket. Eddie was leaning back in his chair with his feet up on the desk, scrolling through his phone and sipping coffee from a paper cup. Robert approached the counter and cleared his throat politely. Eddie looked up with obvious annoyance, as if Robert's presence was an unwelcome interruption to his morning routine. Without putting down his phone or removing his feet from the desk, Eddie asked what Robert wanted in a tone that suggested he really didn't care about the answer. Robert explained that his car had broken down nearby and that he needed to get to the Veterans Hospital as quickly as possible to meet with a young soldier who was counting on him to be there. Eddie's response was immediate and dismissive. He told Robert that his transmission was probably shot and that he was too busy to look at it today anyway. When Robert offered to pay extra for quick service, Eddie laughed and said that money couldn't make him work any faster. He suggested that Robert call a tow truck and find somewhere else to take his problems. The casual cruelty in Eddie's voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just poor customer service, it was deliberate disrespect for an elderly man who was clearly in distress. Robert tried again, explaining that this wasn't about the money and that he just needed to get to the hospital to help a wounded veteran. Eddie's response was even more callous. He said that everyone had sob stories and that Robert's emergency wasn't his problem. He went back to scrolling through his phone as if Robert wasn't even there. The message was clear: Robert was being dismissed not just as a customer, but as a human being whose needs mattered. Standing in that dingy auto repair shop being treated with such casual contempt, Robert felt something he hadn't experienced in many years. It wasn't anger exactly, but rather a deep sadness that in a country he had served with honor and distinction, he could be dismissed so easily by someone who saw him only as an inconvenience. Robert thought about Miguel waiting at the hospital, probably watching the clock and wondering if his new friend was going to show up as promised. He thought about all the young soldiers he had helped over the years, and how many of them had been let down by a society that was quick to thank them for their service, but slow to actually provide meaningful support. As Robert turned to leave the auto repair shop, feeling defeated and unsure of what to do next, he felt his jacket pocket catch on the door handle. The small felt pouch containing his Purple Heart medal slipped out of his pocket and fell to the floor with a soft thud. The metal case opened slightly, and the distinctive purple and gold ribbon became visible against the grimy linoleum floor. Robert bent down slowly, his old wounds protesting as he reached for the medal that represented one of the most significant moments of his life. What happened next would change everything in that room and remind everyone present that heroes don't always look the way we expect them to, and that true service to others often goes unrecognized until a moment of revelation makes it impossible to ignore. The Purple Heart medal lay there on the grimy floor like a small piece of forgotten history waiting to be discovered. Robert slowly picked up the metal case, his arthritic fingers trembling slightly as he closed it and slipped it back into his jacket pocket. Eddie had noticed the commotion and glanced over with mild curiosity, but his expression remained unchanged. To him it was just another old man dropping something. He had no idea he was looking at a piece of American valor that represented sacrifice beyond his comprehension. Robert straightened up as much as his old back would allow and took one last look around the shabby auto repair shop. The walls were covered with faded promotional posters for motor oil and tire brands from decades past. A dusty American flag hung limply in one corner, its colors dulled by years of neglect and cigarette smoke. The irony wasn't lost on Robert that in a place displaying the symbol of the country he had served with distinction, he was being treated as if his needs didn't matter. As Robert moved toward the door, Eddie called out without looking up from his phone. "Hey, old man, your car ain't gonna fix itself. You might want to try Johnson's Auto down on 5th Street, but they're probably gonna charge you double what I would." Eddie's tone carried a mocking quality that suggested he was enjoying Robert's predicament. The casual cruelty was breathtaking in its thoughtlessness. Robert paused at the door and turned back toward Eddie. For a moment he considered telling this young man about the helicopter repairs he had performed under enemy fire, about the lives he had saved, about the Purple Heart in his pocket. But Robert had learned long ago that respect couldn't be demanded or explained. It had to be earned through actions, and sometimes people simply weren't capable of recognizing it when they saw it. Instead, Robert simply said, "Thank you for your time," and pushed open the door to leave. Outside the auto repair shop, Robert stood in the parking lot, trying to decide what to do next. The morning sun was getting higher, and he knew that Miguel's physical therapy session was scheduled to begin in less than 2 hours. The young soldier had been so excited about this day, and Robert couldn't bear the thought of disappointing him. He had seen too many wounded veterans lose hope when the people they counted on failed to show up. Robert began walking toward the main street, hoping to find another repair shop or perhaps a taxi that might be available. His left leg, which had been injured by the same shrapnel that earned him the Purple Heart, ached with each step. The old wound always bothered him more when he was stressed or upset, and today it felt particularly painful. But Robert had walked through much worse pain in his life, and he wasn't about to let a little discomfort stop him from reaching Miguel. As he walked, Robert's mind drifted back to his early days at the Veterans Hospital when he first started volunteering. He remembered feeling overwhelmed by the sight of so many young men and women whose lives had been forever changed by war. Some had lost limbs, others carried invisible wounds that were even harder to heal. The hospital staff was professional and caring, but they were also overworked and understaffed. Robert realized that what many of these veterans needed most wasn't medical treatment, but simply someone who understood what they were going through. His first real connection at the hospital had been with a young Marine named David, who had lost his right arm in Iraq. David was angry, bitter, and convinced that his life was over. He refused to participate in rehabilitation and spent most of his time staring at the ceiling or arguing with anyone who tried to help him. The social workers and counselors had tried everything, but David remained unreachable. Robert had approached David differently. Instead of trying to counsel him or motivate him, Robert had simply sat beside his bed and started talking about engines. He described the intricate mechanical systems of the helicopters he had worked on in Vietnam, the precision required to keep them flying, and the satisfaction that came from solving complex mechanical problems. At first, David ignored him, but gradually, he began to ask questions about the technical details. Over several weeks, Robert had brought David small mechanical puzzles and broken electronics to work on. David's natural intelligence and problem-solving abilities began to emerge as he figured out how to repair things using only his left hand. The breakthrough came when Robert brought him a broken radio that belonged to another veteran. David not only fixed the radio, but improved its reception by modifying the antenna design. The pride on David's face when the radio crackled to life was something Robert would never forget. David eventually became one of the hospital's most successful rehabilitation stories. He learned to use a prosthetic arm, completed his college degree in electrical engineering, and eventually started his own electronics repair business. More importantly, he began mentoring other wounded veterans, helping them discover that losing a limb didn't mean losing their purpose or their value. David often credited Robert with saving his life, though Robert always insisted that David had saved himself. Stories like David's were what motivated Robert to continue volunteering at the hospital, even when his own health problems made it difficult. He had learned that sometimes the most powerful form of healing came not from medical procedures or therapy sessions, but from the simple act of one human being refusing to give up on another. Every veteran he helped reminded him that his own service had meaning and that the sacrifices made in war could be transformed into something positive and life-affirming. Miguel's situation was particularly challenging because his injuries were so severe and his depression so deep. When Robert first met him, Miguel had been in the hospital for 3 months and had barely spoken to anyone. He spent his days sleeping or staring out the window with a blank expression that spoke of profound despair. The medical staff had tried everything, including medication therapy and family interventions, but Miguel remained withdrawn and unresponsive. Robert had started visiting Miguel without any specific plan or agenda. He would simply sit in the chair beside Miguel's bed and talk about whatever came to mind. Sometimes he shared stories from his own military service, but more often he talked about everyday things like the weather, the food in the hospital cafeteria, or interesting articles he had read in the newspaper. He never pressured Miguel to respond or participate. He just provided a consistent presence that said without words that Miguel mattered and that someone cared about what happened to him. The first sign of progress came after 2 weeks when Miguel asked Robert why he kept coming back. It was the first time Miguel had spoken directly to Robert, and the question caught him off guard. Robert thought for a moment and then told Miguel the truth. He said that he came back because he saw something in Miguel that reminded him of himself at a dark time in his own life. He explained that after returning from Vietnam, he had struggled with feelings of isolation and purposelessness until he learned that the best way to heal from trauma was to help others who were facing similar challenges. That conversation opened the door to a deeper relationship between the two veterans. Miguel began sharing his fears about the future and his anger about losing his legs. Robert listened without judgment and shared his own struggles with physical limitations and the challenge of finding meaning after military service. Gradually, Miguel began to participate in small activities that Robert suggested. They played chess, which helped Miguel develop concentration and strategic thinking skills. They worked on crossword puzzles, which stimulated Miguel's mind and gave him a sense of accomplishment. The breakthrough moment came when Robert brought Miguel a magazine article about a Paralympic athlete who had competed in track and field events using prosthetic legs. Miguel studied the article carefully and asked detailed questions about how the prosthetics worked and what kind of training was required to use them effectively. For the first time since his injury, Miguel seemed genuinely interested in something beyond his immediate pain and frustration. That interest led to Miguel's first meeting with a prosthetist who explained the different types of artificial limbs available and the rehabilitation process required to learn to use them. Miguel was initially overwhelmed by the complexity of the devices and the amount of work required to master them, but Robert's encouragement and support helped him take the first tentative steps toward recovery. They set a goal for Miguel to try walking with prosthetics and chose today as the target date. As Robert continued walking down the street, searching for another auto repair shop, he thought about how much this day meant to Miguel. The young soldier had been working with physical therapists for weeks, learning to balance and coordinate his movements with the prosthetic legs. It was exhausting, painful work that required tremendous courage and determination. Miguel had specifically asked Robert to be there for his first real attempt at walking because he said Robert's presence would give him the confidence he needed to succeed. Robert finally spotted another auto repair shop about 6 blocks from Diamond Auto Repair. The sign read Martinez Brothers Automotive, and the building looked much cleaner and more professional than Eddie's place. Robert quickened his pace despite the increasing pain in his leg. Time was running short, and he needed to find someone who was willing to help him get his car running long enough to reach the hospital. As he approached Martinez Brothers Automotive, Robert noticed that the parking lot was busy with customers and mechanics working on various vehicles. The sound of air tools and the smell of motor oil created an atmosphere of productive activity that was very different from the lazy neglect he had encountered at Diamond Auto Repair. Robert felt a surge of hope that maybe he would find someone here who understood the urgency of his situation. Inside the waiting area, Robert was greeted by a middle-aged woman behind the counter who looked up from her paperwork with a genuine smile. She introduced herself as Rosa Martinez and asked how she could help him. Robert explained his situation, once again describing how his car had broken down and how important it was for him to get to the veterans' hospital as quickly as possible. Rosa listened attentively, and her expression grew more concerned as Robert explained about Miguel and the physical therapy session. Rosa called out to one of the mechanics working in the garage, and a man in his 40s approached the counter, wiping his hands on a clean shop rag. She introduced him as her brother Carlos and explained Robert's situation. Carlos listened carefully and then asked Robert where his car was located. When Robert told him it was about 6 blocks away, Carlos grabbed his keys and said he would drive Robert back to take a look at the problem. The difference in treatment was immediately apparent. Carlos treated Robert with respect and dignity, asking questions about the car's symptoms and explaining what he thought might be wrong. During the short drive back to Robert's broken-down sedan, Carlos mentioned that his own father had served in the Korean War and that he had great respect for veterans. He said that helping Robert get to the hospital wasn't just good business, it was the right thing to do. When they reached Robert's car, Carlos quickly diagnosed the problem as a faulty alternator that had caused the battery to drain. He explained that while the repair would normally take several hours, he could install a temporary jumper system that would allow the car to run long enough to get to the hospital. Carlos worked quickly and efficiently using his portable tools to bypass the failed alternator and connect a temporary charging system to the battery. Within 30 minutes, Robert's car was running again. Carlos refused to accept payment for the temporary repair, saying that it was his honor to help a veteran in need. He gave Robert his business card and said that when Robert was ready to have the alternator properly replaced, he would give him a fair price and excellent service. The contrast between Carlos's professionalism and Eddie's callous indifference couldn't have been more striking. As Robert drove toward the veterans' hospital, he reflected on the morning's events and the two very different types of people he had encountered. Eddie represented the worst aspects of modern society, the casual cruelty and thoughtless selfishness that made life harder for people who were already struggling. Carlos represented something much better, the understanding that we all have a responsibility to help each other and that small acts of kindness can make an enormous difference in someone's life. Robert arrived at the Veterans Hospital with just enough time to park his car and make his way to the rehabilitation center where Miguel was waiting. The young soldier's face lit up when he saw Robert walk through the door, and he said he had been worried that something had happened. Robert assured Miguel that nothing could have kept him away from this important day, and that he was honored to be there to witness Miguel's first steps toward independence and recovery. What Robert didn't tell Miguel was that his Purple Heart medal was still in his jacket pocket, serving as a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on distant battlefields, but in the everyday moments when we choose to help each other overcome the obstacles that life puts in our path. The medal represented not just Robert's past service, but his ongoing commitment to never giving up on the people who needed his support. The events at Diamond Auto Repair had reminded Robert that respect and recognition weren't automatic even for those who had earned them through sacrifice and service. But the kindness shown by Carlos Martinez had restored his faith in human decency and confirmed his belief that there were still people in the world who understood that we are all connected, and that helping others in need is one of the highest forms of honor and service. Miguel's rehabilitation session was nothing short of miraculous. Robert watched with tears in his eyes as the young soldier took his first tentative steps with the prosthetic legs. Each movement required enormous concentration and courage, but Miguel persevered, driven by the knowledge that Robert had kept his promise to be there. The physical therapist later told Robert that Miguel's determination during that session was unlike anything she had seen before, and that his progress exceeded all expectations. After the successful therapy session, Robert and Miguel sat together in the hospital cafeteria, sharing coffee and talking about the future. Miguel was excited about the possibilities that lay ahead and spoke about his dreams of returning to college and perhaps starting a family someday. Robert listened with the deep satisfaction that comes from witnessing another person discover hope after a period of despair. This was why he continued to volunteer despite his own physical limitations and financial struggles. As Robert prepared to leave the hospital that afternoon, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The morning's challenges at Diamond Auto Repair seemed insignificant compared to the joy of witnessing Miguel's breakthrough. Robert had learned long ago that life was full of obstacles and setbacks, but that persistence and faith could overcome almost any difficulty. The kindness shown by Carlos Martinez had made the day possible, and Robert was grateful for the reminder that there were still good people in the world. However, Robert's sense of peace was about to be shattered by an unexpected phone call. As he walked toward his car in the hospital parking lot, his old flip phone rang with an urgent tone. The caller was Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the head of the Veterans Hospital Volunteer Program. Her voice was tense and concerned as she explained that there had been a serious incident at Diamond Auto Repair and that Robert's name had come up in connection with it. Dr. Walsh explained that earlier that afternoon a local news reporter had received an anonymous tip about poor treatment of veterans at the auto repair shop. The reporter had visited Diamond Auto Repair with a hidden camera and had recorded Eddie making disparaging comments about veterans and elderly customers. During the recorded conversation, Eddie had specifically mentioned an old Asian man who had come in that morning claiming to need help getting to the veterans hospital. Eddie had mocked Robert's request for urgent service and had made several inappropriate comments about veterans who expected special treatment. The news story was scheduled to air on the evening broadcast, and Dr. Walsh was concerned about the potential impact on the Veterans Hospital and the volunteer program. She asked Robert if he would be willing to speak with the reporter and share his side of the story. Robert was reluctant to get involved in a public controversy, but Dr. Walsh explained that his testimony could help protect other veterans from similar treatment and might lead to positive changes in how the community treated elderly and disabled customers. Robert agreed to meet with the reporter the following morning, but he spent the rest of the evening troubled by the situation. He had never sought publicity or recognition for his military service, and he was uncomfortable with the idea of being in the news. However, he understood that sometimes speaking out about injustice was necessary to prevent others from experiencing similar treatment. His military training had taught him that standing up for what was right was more important than personal comfort. The next morning, Robert arrived at the Veterans Hospital early to meet with Channel 7 news reporter Amanda Foster. Amanda was a young woman in her 30s who had built a reputation for investigative stories that exposed corruption and injustice in the local community. She greeted Robert with respect and professionalism and explained that her investigation into Diamond Auto Repair had uncovered a pattern of discriminatory treatment toward elderly minority and veteran customers. Amanda showed Robert the hidden camera footage from Eddie's interview, and Robert was shocked by the callousness and prejudice displayed. Eddie had not only mocked Robert's request for help, but had made several racist comments about Asian customers and had expressed the opinion that veterans who expected special treatment were entitled and demanding. The footage was damaging, clearly showed that Robert's treatment at the shop was part of a larger pattern of discrimination. During his interview with Amanda, Robert chose his words carefully. He described his experience at Diamond Auto Repair honestly, but without anger or bitterness. He explained how the poor treatment had made him feel and how it had nearly prevented him from keeping his commitment to Miguel. Robert emphasized that his concern wasn't just about his own experience, but about the message that such treatment sent to other veterans who might need help in emergency situations. Robert also made sure to highlight the positive experience he had received at Martinez Brothers Automotive. He praised Carlos Martinez for his professionalism and willingness to help and suggested that Carlos's approach should serve as a model for how businesses should treat all customers, but especially those who had served their country. Robert wanted the story to be about more than just one bad experience. He wanted it to inspire others to treat veterans and elderly customers with the respect they deserved. The news story aired that evening and had an immediate impact on the community. The footage of Eddie's discriminatory comments sparked outrage among viewers and led to calls for boycotts of Diamond Auto Repair. More importantly, the story inspired several other veterans to come forward with their own experiences of poor treatment at various businesses around the city. What had started as one elderly veteran's difficult morning had become a catalyst for a broader conversation about respect and dignity. The response to the news story was overwhelming. Robert received dozens of phone calls and letters from people who wanted to thank him for speaking out and to share their own stories of discrimination or poor treatment. Many of the callers were veterans themselves who had experienced similar situations but had been too embarrassed or discouraged to complain. Robert's willingness to go public with his story had given them courage to speak up about their own experiences. One of the most meaningful responses came from a group of local business owners who formed what they called the Veterans Honor Initiative. This group committed to providing priority service and special accommodations for veterans and elderly customers. They created a network of businesses that would guarantee respectful treatment and emergency assistance for people in situations similar to Robert's. Carlos Martinez became one of the founding members of the initiative, and his auto repair shop became a model for the kind of customer service the group promoted. The initiative also established a fund to provide emergency transportation and assistance for veterans who needed help getting to medical appointments or important events. Robert was asked to serve on the advisory board for the fund and to help identify veterans who might benefit from the services. The fund was named the Chen Emergency Assistance Program in honor of Robert's service and his willingness to speak out about injustice. Diamond Auto Repair faced significant consequences from the negative publicity. Eddie was fired from his position, and the shop owner was forced to implement new training programs and policies to address discriminatory treatment of customers. The shop also made a public apology to Robert and donated money to the Veterans Hospital in an attempt to repair their damaged reputation. However, the business never fully recovered from the scandal and eventually closed down permanently. The broader impact of Robert's story extended far beyond the local community. The news report was picked up by national media outlets and sparked a nationwide conversation about the treatment of veterans in civilian settings. Robert was invited to speak at several conferences and events about his experiences and about the importance of treating all customers with dignity and respect regardless of their age, race, or background. One of the most powerful moments came when Robert was invited to speak at a national conference of auto repair shop owners. Standing before an audience of several hundred business owners, Robert shared his story and challenged them to think about how they treated their most vulnerable customers. He spoke about the difference between Eddie's callous indifference and Carlos's compassionate professionalism and urged the audience to choose which type of business owner they wanted to be. Robert's speech at the conference was met with a standing ovation and led to the creation of industry-wide standards for customer service and anti-discrimination policies. Many shop owners implemented new training programs and established procedures for handling emergency situations involving elderly or disabled customers. The conference organizers created an annual award in Robert's honor for auto repair shops that demonstrated exceptional service to veterans and elderly customers. The recognition and attention that followed the news story was both gratifying and overwhelming for Robert. He was honored to receive several awards, including a community service recognition from the mayor and a special commendation from the State Veterans Affairs Office. However, Robert always emphasized that the real heroes were people like Carlos Martinez who chose to help others without expecting recognition or reward. Miguel's progress continued to exceed all expectations, and he became one of the hospital's most successful rehabilitation cases. He learned to walk confidently with his prosthetic legs and eventually returned to college to study computer science. Miguel credited Robert's support and encouragement as crucial factors in his recovery, and he often spoke about how Robert's presence during his first walking session had given him the confidence to believe in himself again. The relationship between Robert and Miguel evolved into a lasting friendship that extended far beyond the hospital setting. Miguel frequently visited Robert at his apartment, and they worked together on various projects, including building computers for other veterans and organizing fundraising events for the hospital. Miguel's technical skills combined with Robert's mechanical knowledge created a powerful partnership that benefited many other veterans. Robert also began working more closely with the hospital's prosthetics department, helping other amputees adjust to their artificial limbs and learn to navigate daily challenges. His unique combination of mechanical expertise and personal understanding of trauma made him an invaluable resource for veterans who were struggling with the transition to life with prosthetics. Robert developed several innovative modifications and techniques that improved the functionality and comfort of prosthetic devices. The success of the Veterans Honor Initiative led to its expansion into other cities and eventually became a national organization. Robert was elected to the National Board of Directors and traveled across the country, helping to establish new chapters and train business owners in veteran-friendly customer service practices. His story became a central part of the organization's mission, and his Purple Heart Medal was featured in promotional materials as a symbol of the sacrifice and service that deserved recognition and respect. One particularly meaningful event occurred on the first anniversary of the Diamond Auto Repair incident. The local Veterans Hospital organized a special ceremony to honor Robert's service and his advocacy for veteran rights. The ceremony was attended by hundreds of people, including many of the veterans Robert had helped over the years. Miguel served as the master of ceremonies and delivered a moving speech about how Robert's support had changed his life. During the ceremony, Robert was presented with a special award recognizing his lifetime of service both in the military and as a volunteer. However, the moment that meant the most to Robert came when a group of young veterans from the hospital presented him with a custom-made display case for his Purple Heart Medal. The case was engraved with the words, "True honor is not in the recognition we receive, but in the service we give," and was signed by all the veterans Robert had helped over the years. As Robert stood before the audience holding his Purple Heart Medal in its new display case, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The discrimination he had experienced at Diamond Auto Repair had been painful and humiliating, but it had also led to positive changes that would benefit countless other veterans. Sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with courage to speak truth and demand justice. The ceremony concluded with Robert's own speech, in which he emphasized that the real victory was not in the recognition he had received, but in the knowledge that other veterans would be treated with the dignity and respect they deserved. He spoke about the importance of never giving up on people who needed help, and about the power of individual actions to create positive change in the world. Robert's words were met with another standing ovation and many tears from audience members who had been touched by his story. As the crowd dispersed after the ceremony, Robert found himself surrounded by young veterans who wanted to thank him personally for his service and advocacy. Each handshake and expression of gratitude reminded Robert why he had chosen to speak out about his experience at the auto repair shop. The temporary embarrassment and discomfort had been a small price to pay for the lasting improvements in how veterans were treated throughout the community. 6 months after the ceremony, Robert received an unexpected phone call that would open an entirely new chapter in his remarkable journey. The caller was Dr. Sarah Kim, a researcher at Stanford University who had been following the Veterans Honor Initiative and was interested in documenting Robert's methods for helping traumatized veterans. Dr. Kim explained that she was leading a groundbreaking study on innovative approaches to veteran rehabilitation and believed that Robert's techniques could be scaled up to help thousands of veterans across the country. Dr. Kim invited Robert to visit Stanford University to participate in a research project that would analyze his mentoring methods and create training materials for other veteran advocates. Robert was initially hesitant about the academic setting, but Miguel encouraged him to accept the invitation, pointing out that this could be an opportunity to help far more veterans than he could reach through individual mentoring. Miguel offered to accompany Robert on the trip to California and to help document the research process. The visit to Stanford was transformative for Robert in ways he had never anticipated. Dr. Kim and her research team were deeply impressed by Robert's intuitive understanding of trauma psychology, and his ability to connect with veterans who had been unreachable through traditional therapy methods. They recorded hours of interviews with Robert about his techniques and observed him working with veteran volunteers who had agreed to participate in the study. One of the most significant discoveries was Robert's use of mechanical problem solving. As a metaphor for emotional healing, Dr. Kim realized that Robert's background as a helicopter mechanic had given him a unique perspective on how to approach complex problems systematically and patiently. When Robert worked with veterans, he helped them break down their overwhelming challenges into smaller, manageable components, just as he had learned to troubleshoot complicated mechanical systems. The research team was particularly interested in Robert's approach to building trust with veterans who had been disappointed by previous attempts at help. Robert explained that he never made promises he couldn't keep and that he always followed through on his commitments, no matter how small. He told the researchers that trust was like a delicate mechanical component that could be easily damaged but could be rebuilt with patience and consistent care. During one of the research sessions, Robert worked with a young female veteran named Lisa, who had been struggling with severe PTSD after serving 3 tours in Iraq. Lisa had been resistant to traditional therapy and had stopped attending her appointments at the VA hospital. However, something about Robert's quiet confidence and non-judgmental approach allowed her to begin opening up about her experiences. For the first time, Robert's method with Lisa was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of focusing on her trauma directly, he taught her to repair small electronic devices that had been donated to the research project. As Lisa worked on fixing broken radios and cell phones, Robert shared stories about his own struggles with readjustment after Vietnam. He never pushed her to talk about her experiences, but created a safe space where she could process her emotions. While engaged in meaningful, productive work, the breakthrough came when Lisa successfully repaired a complex circuit board that had been challenging even experienced technicians. The pride and satisfaction she felt from solving the technical problem translated into renewed confidence in her ability to overcome other challenges in her life. Dr. Kim and her team documented this transformation and realized they were witnessing a completely new approach to trauma therapy that combined occupational therapy with peer counseling in ways that had never been systematically studied. The Stanford research led to the development of the Chen method, a formalized approach to veteran rehabilitation that incorporated Robert's techniques into a structured program. The method emphasized the importance of peer mentorship, mechanical problem solving, and gradual trust building as key components of effective trauma treatment. Dr. Kim published several academic papers about the research, and the Chen method began to attract attention from veteran affairs departments and rehabilitation centers across the country. Robert was invited to train therapists and counselors in the new methodology, and he found himself traveling to medical centers and universities throughout the United States. Each training session brought new insights and refinements to the approach. As Robert learned from other professionals and adapted his methods to different populations and settings, Miguel often accompanied Robert on these trips, serving as a living example of the method's effectiveness and helping to train other veteran mentors. One of the most impactful training sessions took place at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, where Robert worked with therapists who were treating some of the most severely wounded veterans from recent conflicts. The medical staff was initially skeptical about Robert's unconventional approach, but they were amazed by the results when he worked with patients who had been unresponsive to traditional treatments. Robert's work at Walter Reed included a session with a young Marine named James, who had lost both arms in an explosion in Afghanistan. James had been deeply depressed and had refused to consider prosthetic limbs or adaptive technologies. However, when Robert introduced him to voice-controlled computer systems and showed him how technology could be modified to work with his specific needs, James began to see possibilities he had never imagined. The transformation in James was dramatic and inspiring. Within weeks, he was learning to use sophisticated adaptive equipment and was beginning to explore career possibilities in computer programming and cybersecurity. James eventually became one of the first graduates of a new adaptive technology program that was developed based on Robert's recommendations. His success story became a powerful example of how the right mentorship and approach could unlock potential that traditional medical models had failed to reach. The success of the Chen method led to its adoption by the Department of Veterans Affairs as an official component of their rehabilitation programs. Robert was appointed as a special advisor to the VA and was given resources to establish training centers in major cities across the country. The program was initially implemented as a pilot project in 10 locations, but the results were so positive that it was rapidly expanded to over 50 centers within 2 years. Robert's new role with the VA allowed him to work with policymakers and administrators to address systemic issues that affected veteran care. He advocated for changes in how veterans were treated in civilian settings and pushed for better coordination between military medical facilities and community resources. His experience with discrimination at Diamond Auto Repair had given him valuable insights into the challenges veterans faced when trying to access services in the civilian world. One of Robert's most significant policy achievements was the creation of the Veteran Emergency Response Network, a nationwide system that connected veterans in crisis with immediate assistance. The network included partnerships with businesses like Carlos Martinez's auto repair shop that had committed to providing priority service for veterans in emergency situations. The network also included medical transport services, counseling hotlines, and emergency financial assistance for veterans facing unexpected hardships. The network was tested during a major hurricane that hit the Gulf Coast and left thousands of veterans stranded without transportation or communication. The emergency response system that Robert had helped design worked flawlessly, coordinating rescue efforts and ensuring that veteran families received priority assistance. The success of the hurricane response demonstrated the value of the network and led to its permanent funding and expansion. Robert's work also extended into the area of veteran employment and entrepreneurship. He realized that many veterans had valuable skills and experiences that were not being recognized or utilized by civilian employers. Working with Miguel and other young veterans, Robert helped establish a program that connected veteran job seekers with employers who understood the value of military training and experience. The employment program included a mentorship component where successful veteran entrepreneurs worked with newly transitioning service members to help them start their own businesses. Robert served as a mentor to several veteran-owned auto repair shops and helped them implement the customer service standards that had been developed through the Veterans Honor Initiative. These businesses became models for how veteran-owned enterprises could serve their communities while providing meaningful employment for other veterans. One of the most successful mentorship relationships involved a young veteran named Marcus who had been trained as a helicopter mechanic in the Army. Marcus had struggled to find civilian employment because employers didn't understand how his military training translated to civilian aircraft maintenance. Robert worked with Marcus to help him obtain civilian certifications and connected him with aviation companies that were actively seeking veterans with his skills. Marcus eventually started his own aircraft maintenance company that specialized in serving small airports and private aircraft owners. His company became known for exceptional service and attention to detail, qualities that Marcus had learned during his military service. The business grew rapidly, and Marcus was able to employ several other veteran mechanics, providing them with stable, well-paying jobs that utilized their military training. The success stories from Robert's various programs began to attract national attention, and he was invited to speak at congressional hearings about veteran affairs. Robert's testimony before Congress was powerful and moving as he described the potential of veterans to contribute to society when they received appropriate support and recognition. He emphasized that veterans were not looking for charity, but for opportunities to use their skills and experience in meaningful ways. Robert's congressional testimony led to increased funding for veteran programs and new legislation that required federal contractors to prioritize hiring veterans. The legislation also included provisions for veteran-owned businesses to receive preference in government contracting and established new training programs to help veterans transition to civilian careers. Robert was recognized as one of the key advocates whose work had made these policy changes possible. As Robert approached his 80th birthday, he reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a simple car breakdown and a dismissive mechanic. What had started as a moment of discrimination and disrespect had evolved into a nationwide movement that had improved the lives of thousands of veterans. Robert understood that his individual experience had been transformed into something much larger because he had chosen to speak out about injustice rather than simply accepting it. The annual Veterans Honor Initiative Conference had grown into one of the largest gatherings of veteran advocates, business owners, and policymakers in the country. Robert was always the keynote speaker at these conferences, and his presentations combined personal stories with practical advice about how to create positive change in communities. His speeches invariably received standing ovations and inspired attendees to return to their communities with renewed commitment to serving veterans. At the most recent conference, Robert announced the establishment of the Chen Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to expanding veteran support programs and continuing the research that had started at Stanford University. The foundation was funded by donations from businesses that had benefited from veteran employees and by individuals who had been inspired by Robert's story. Miguel was named as the foundation's executive director, ensuring that Robert's work would continue even after he was no longer able to travel and speak. The foundation's first major initiative was the creation of a scholarship program for children of disabled veterans. Robert had learned that many veteran families struggled financially, especially when injuries prevented the veteran from working. The scholarship program provided full college funding for students whose veteran parents had been injured in service, ensuring that the next generation would have opportunities to succeed and contribute to society. Robert also used the foundation to support research into new technologies that could improve the lives of disabled veterans. Working with universities and technology companies, the foundation funded the development of advanced prosthetics, adaptive vehicles, and communication devices that were specifically designed for veterans with various types of injuries. These innovations often had applications beyond the veteran community and contributed to improved quality of life for all disabled individuals. One of the foundation's most innovative projects was the creation of a virtual reality system that allowed veterans to practice using new prosthetics and adaptive equipment in safe simulated environments. The system was developed in partnership with gaming companies and medical device manufacturers and represented a completely new approach to rehabilitation training. Veterans could practice complex tasks repeatedly without risk of injury and could build confidence before attempting similar activities in real-world settings. The virtual reality project was initially tested at the Veterans Hospital, where Robert had first volunteered, and the results exceeded all expectations. Veterans who used the system showed faster adaptation to prosthetics and higher success rates in rehabilitation programs. The technology was subsequently adopted by rehabilitation centers across the country and became a standard component of advanced prosthetic training programs. As Robert looked back on his remarkable journey from combat helicopter mechanic to national advocate for veteran rights, he understood that every challenge and setback had served a purpose in preparing him for the work he was called to do. The discrimination he had experienced at Diamond Auto Repair had been painful, but it had also provided the catalyst for changes that would benefit countless other veterans. Sometimes the most difficult experiences in life become the foundation for the most meaningful contributions we can make to the world. Robert's Purple Heart medal remained in its place of honor in his apartment, but it was no longer a solitary symbol of past sacrifice. It was surrounded by photographs, awards, and letters from the hundreds of veterans whose lives had been touched by Robert's work. The medal served as a reminder that true honor comes not from recognition or praise, but from the daily choice to serve others and to stand up for what is right, even when it requires personal sacrifice. The story that began with an elderly veteran being dismissed by a callous mechanic had become a testament to the power of individual courage to create lasting positive change. Robert's willingness to speak out about injustice had rippled outward through communities and institutions, creating a legacy of service that would continue long after his own story had ended. In the end, Robert had proven that heroes are not defined by their age or circumstances, but by their willingness to keep fighting for what matters most. The morning of Robert's 80th birthday dawned bright and clear with the promise of something extraordinary in the air. What Robert didn't know was that Miguel and the Chen Foundation team had been planning a surprise celebration that would bring together people from every chapter of his remarkable journey. The event would take place at the same Veterans Hospital, where Robert had first started volunteering decades ago, but it had grown into something far beyond a simple birthday party. Robert woke up that morning expecting to spend a quiet day at home, perhaps reading or working in his small garden. His daily routine had become more measured in recent years, as his body reminded him that even heroes are subject to the passage of time. However, his arthritis was manageable, and his mind remained sharp, focused on the Foundation's work and the veterans who still needed support and encouragement. At precisely 9 o'clock, Miguel arrived at Robert's apartment with what he claimed was a simple request for help with a Foundation project at the hospital. Robert dressed carefully in his best shirt and pinned his Vietnam service pin to his lapel, as he always did when visiting the hospital. He had no idea that this small gesture would become part of a much larger celebration of service and sacrifice. The drive to the hospital seemed routine until Miguel turned into the main parking lot, and Robert noticed that it was unusually crowded for a weekday morning. Cars with license plates from different states filled every available space, and Robert could see people in military uniforms walking toward the main entrance. Miguel explained that there was some kind of special event happening, but assured Robert that it wouldn't interfere with their Foundation work. As they walked through the hospital entrance, Robert was surprised to see decorations and banners that he hadn't noticed during his previous visits. The lobby was filled with people wearing Veterans Honor Initiative t-shirts, and many faces looked familiar, though Robert couldn't immediately place where he had met them. Miguel guided Robert toward the main auditorium, explaining that they needed to pick up some paperwork before starting their project. When the auditorium doors opened, Robert was stunned to see hundreds of people rising to their feet in thunderous applause. The stage was decorated with American flags and a large banner that read, "Honoring Master Sergeant Robert Chen, 80 years of service and sacrifice." Robert stood frozen in the doorway, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the surprise, and the sea of faces looking back at him with expressions of gratitude and respect. Miguel gently guided Robert to a seat in the front row, where he found himself sitting next to Dr. Sarah Kim from Stanford University and Carlos Martinez, the mechanic who had helped him so many years ago. Carlos had driven all the way from his auto repair shop to be part of this celebration, and he clasped Robert's hand warmly as they sat together. The circle was complete from the moment of initial dismissal to this overwhelming display of recognition and love. The celebration began with a video presentation that chronicled Robert's journey from his childhood in Chinatown through his military service in Robert's journey from his childhood in China, Vietnam, to his decades of volunteer work and advocacy. The video included interviews with dozens of veterans whose lives had been transformed by Robert's mentorship and support. Each testimony was a powerful reminder of the ripple effects that one person's dedication could create across generations. One of the most moving segments featured James, the young Marine, who had lost both arms and had initially refused prosthetic treatment. James appeared on screen using adaptive technology to control his computer and described how Robert's introduction to assistive devices had completely changed his perspective on what was possible. James had gone on to earn a degree in cybersecurity and was now working for a major technology company while also mentoring other disabled veterans. The video also included a special message from Lisa, the female veteran who had overcome her PTSD through Robert's mechanical therapy approach. Lisa had become a certified counselor herself and was now using modified versions of Robert's techniques to help other trauma survivors. She spoke about how learning to repair electronic devices had taught her that broken things could be made whole again, and that the same principle applied to healing emotional wounds. Dr. Kim took the stage to discuss the academic impact of Robert's work and the continuing research that was expanding the Chen method to help veterans around the world. She announced that Stanford University was establishing the Robert Chen Center for Innovative Veteran Therapy, which would continue developing and refining therapeutic approaches based on his pioneering techniques. The center would also train therapists and researchers to carry forward Robert's legacy of combining practical problem-solving with compassionate mentorship. The celebration included presentations from government officials who spoke about the policy changes that had resulted from Robert's advocacy work. A representative from the Department of Veterans Affairs announced that the Veteran Emergency Response Network had helped over 50,000 veterans in crisis situations and had become a model for other countries seeking to improve their veteran support systems. The network's success had led to its expansion into disaster relief and emergency response for all vulnerable populations. Miguel took the stage to deliver the keynote address about Robert's impact on his own life and the lives of countless other veterans. He spoke about the day when Robert had first visited him in the hospital and how that initial act of compassion had set in motion a chain of events that transformed not just his own recovery, but the entire approach to veteran rehabilitation. Miguel's words were deeply personal and heartfelt as he described Robert as the father figure he had never had and the mentor who had taught him that true strength came from helping others rather than dwelling on personal losses. The audience was moved to tears as Miguel announced the creation of a new scholarship program that would provide full college funding for 100 children of disabled veterans each year. The scholarships would be funded by donations from the thousands of businesses that had joined the Veterans Honor Initiative and would ensure that the next generation of military families would have opportunities to succeed and contribute to the families would have opportunities to succeed and contribute to society. The program would be named the Robert Chen Scholarship for Excellence in Service, reflecting the values that had guided Robert's entire life. One of the most surprising moments of the celebration came when Carlos Martinez was invited to the stage to speak about his role in Robert's story. Carlos explained that helping Robert on that difficult morning had been one of the most meaningful experiences of his career and had inspired him to completely transform his approach to customer service. He announced that his auto repair shop had become a training center for the Veterans Honor Initiative and that he had personally trained over 200 mechanics in veteran-friendly service practices. Carlos also revealed that he had used his own resources to track down Eddie, the mechanic who had treated Robert so poorly at Diamond Auto Repair. Instead of seeking revenge, Carlos had offered Eddie a job at his shop and had spent months helping him understand the impact of his actions and learn better ways to treat customers. Eddie was now one of Carlos's most dedicated employees and had become an advocate for respectful customer service, especially for elderly and veteran customers. The transformation of Eddie from antagonist to ally represented one of the most powerful themes in Robert's story, the idea that even people who had acted badly could change and grow when given proper guidance and opportunities. Carlos's decision to extend forgiveness and offer redemption rather than punishment reflected the same spirit of service and compassion that had characterized Robert's entire approach to helping others. As the formal presentations concluded, the celebration shifted to a more personal format, with individual veterans and community members sharing brief stories about how Robert's work had touched their lives. The testimonials continued for over an hour, with person after person describing moments of crisis when Robert's support had made the difference between despair and hope. Many of the speakers had never met Robert personally, but had benefited from programs and policies that had grown out of his advocacy work. One particularly moving testimony came from the daughter of a veteran who had committed suicide before the Veterans Honor Initiative had been established. She spoke about how her father's death had inspired her to become involved in veteran advocacy, and how Robert's work had given her hope that other families might be spared the tragedy that had devastated her own life. She announced that she was dedicating her career to expanding mental health services for veterans, and that she considered Robert to be her inspiration and guide. The celebration included the presentation of numerous awards and honors, including a special congressional medal recognizing Robert's contributions to veteran welfare and national service. However, the moment that touched Robert most deeply came when a group of children from military families presented him with a handmade book containing drawings and letters expressing their gratitude for his work. The innocent words and colorful pictures reminded Robert that his efforts were not just helping current veterans but were creating a better world for future generations. As the formal ceremony concluded, the celebration moved to a reception where Robert had the opportunity to speak personally with many of the attendees. He was particularly moved to meet several young veterans who were just beginning their own journeys of recovery and service. Robert shared his wisdom and encouragement with each person while also learning about new challenges and opportunities that the next generation of veterans would face. During the reception, Robert was approached by a delegation of international visitors who had traveled from several countries to learn about the Veterans Honor Initiative and the Chen method. Representatives from Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom described how they were adapting Robert's approaches to help veterans in their own nations. Robert was amazed to learn that his work was having global impact and that veterans around the world were benefiting from innovations that had grown out of his simple commitment to helping others. The international dimension of Robert's legacy added new meaning to his life's work and reminded him that the principles of service and sacrifice transcended national boundaries. Veterans everywhere faced similar challenges in transitioning from military to civilian life, and Robert's methods were proving effective across different cultures and societies. The global expansion of his work ensured that his impact would continue, growing long after his own active involvement had ended. As the celebration drew to a close, Robert was invited to the stage one final time to address the assembled crowd. He stood before the microphone looking out at hundreds of faces that represented every chapter of his remarkable journey. Veterans he had mentored personally sat next to researchers who were expanding his methods and business owners who had transformed their practices based on his example. The diversity of the audience reflected the broad impact that one person's commitment to service could have across society. Robert's final speech was brief but powerful as he emphasized that the real celebration should focus not on his individual achievements but on the collective commitment to serving others that everyone in the room represented. He spoke about the importance of continuing the work even when he was no longer able to participate actively and challenged everyone present to find their own ways to serve veterans and other vulnerable populations in their communities. He concluded his remarks by returning to the theme that had guided his entire life, the understanding that true honor comes not from recognition or awards, but from the daily choice to help others overcome challenges and achieve their potential. Robert reminded the audience that every person had the capacity to make a difference in someone else's life, and that the greatest tribute they could pay to his work would be to continue serving others with the same dedication and compassion that had characterized his own journey. The celebration ended with a moving rendition of taps played by a young bugler who had lost his sight in military service. but had learned to play the instrument as part of his rehabilitation. The haunting melody filled the auditorium as everyone stood in silent tribute, not just to Robert, but to all veterans who had served with honor and sacrifice. The moment was both solemn and uplifting, a perfect conclusion to a day that had celebrated the best of human nature and the power of individual commitment to create positive change. As Robert left the hospital that evening, surrounded by friends and colleagues who had become his extended family, he reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment. The discrimination and disrespect he had experienced at Diamond Auto Repair seemed like a lifetime ago, but he understood that every challenge and setback had been necessary to prepare him for the work he was called to do. Sometimes the most difficult experiences become the foundation for the most meaningful contributions we can make to the world. The Purple Heart medal in his jacket pocket seemed to pulse with warmth as Robert realized that his military service had been just the beginning of a lifetime commitment to serving others. The medal represented not just his past sacrifice, but his ongoing dedication to ensuring that other veterans received the respect and support they deserved. True honor was not about personal recognition, but about using whatever influence and resources one possessed to make life better for those who came after. Robert's 80th birthday celebration had demonstrated that individual actions could indeed create lasting change when guided by principles of service, sacrifice, and compassion. The hundreds of lives that had been touched by his work would continue rippling outward through communities and generations, creating a legacy that would endure long after his own story had ended. In the end, Robert had proven that heroes are not defined by their circumstances, but by their willingness to keep serving others, regardless of the obstacles they face. 2 years after his 80th birthday celebration, Robert faced a new challenge that would test everything he had learned about resilience and adaptation. During a routine medical checkup, his doctor discovered that Robert's eyesight was deteriorating due to age-related macular degeneration. The diagnosis meant that Robert would gradually lose his central vision, making it increasingly difficult to read, drive, and perform many of the activities that had defined his volunteer work for decades. The news was devastating for Robert, who had always relied on his keen mechanical vision to diagnose problems and guide others through complex repairs. However, instead of allowing the diagnosis to defeat him, Robert approached this new obstacle with the same systematic problem-solving methodology he had used throughout his military and civilian careers. He began researching adaptive technologies and connecting with organizations that help people adjust to vision loss. Miguel immediately stepped forward to provide additional support, serving as Robert's eyes during foundation meetings and helping him navigate the transition to audio-based communication systems. Together, they discovered that many of the adaptive technologies Robert had helped develop for disabled veterans could be modified to assist people with vision impairment. This realization opened up an entirely new area of advocacy and innovation that would benefit millions of people beyond the veteran community. Robert's experience with vision loss led him to partner with the National Federation of the Blind to develop new training programs for veterans who had lost their sight in combat. He understood from personal experience how overwhelming the adjustment could be, and how important it was to have mentors who could demonstrate that meaningful, productive lives were still possible. Robert's unique combination of military experience, mechanical knowledge, and recent personal experience with vision loss made him an ideal advocate for blind veterans. The partnership resulted in the creation of the Adaptive Technology Training Center, a facility that specialized in teaching blind and visually impaired veterans to use cutting-edge assistive devices. The center was housed in a new wing of the Veterans Hospital and featured state-of-the-art equipment, including voice-controlled computers, tactile feedback systems, and advanced mobility aids. Robert served as the center's founding director and helped train the staff in his proven methods of patient mentorship and gradual skill building. One of the center's first students was a young Air Force pilot named Captain Sarah Williams, who had lost her sight when her aircraft was struck by enemy fire during a reconnaissance mission. Sarah had been struggling with severe depression and had convinced herself that her life was essentially over now that she could no longer fly. When she arrived at the training center, she was bitter, angry, and completely resistant to any suggestions about adaptation or rehabilitation. Robert's approach with Sarah was characteristically patient and methodical. Instead of focusing immediately on her blindness, he spent several sessions simply talking with her about flying and the technical aspects of aviation that had made her such a skilled pilot. Robert's own experience with helicopters allowed him to connect with Sarah on a level that other counselors had been unable to reach. He helped her understand that her knowledge and expertise were still valuable even if she could no longer use them in their original context. The breakthrough came when Robert introduced Sarah to a new technology that allowed pilots to experience flight simulations through audio and tactile feedback systems. The technology had been developed originally for training purposes, but Robert realized it could help blind veterans maintain their connection to aviation while exploring new career possibilities. Sarah was amazed to discover that she could still navigate complex flight scenarios using only sound and touch, and this experience rekindled her passion for aviation-related work. Sarah eventually became an instructor at a civilian flight school where she taught navigation and emergency procedures to sighted pilots. Her unique perspective as someone who had flown both with and without vision made her an exceptionally effective teacher. Students were amazed by her ability to identify aircraft problems by sound alone and to navigate using instruments and radio communications with unprecedented precision. Sarah's success became another powerful example of how perceived limitations could be transformed into unique strengths with proper support and training. The success of the Adaptive Technology Training Center attracted attention from technology companies that were developing new assistive devices. Robert became a consultant for several firms, helping them understand the specific needs of disabled veterans and ensuring that new products would be practical and effective for real-world use. His input was particularly valuable because he combined technical knowledge with personal experience and deep understanding of the veteran mindset. One of the most innovative projects Robert worked on was the development of a smart prosthetic arm that could be controlled through thought patterns and provided tactile feedback to the user. The technology was revolutionary, but the early prototypes were difficult to use and frequently malfunctioned. Robert worked with the engineering team to identify design problems and suggest modifications that would make the devices more reliable and user-friendly. The improved prosthetic arms were tested at the Veterans Hospital with remarkable results. Veterans who had been unable to use previous prosthetic devices found that the new technology allowed them to perform complex tasks with precision and confidence. The success of the project led to mass production of the devices and their distribution to veterans' hospitals throughout the country. Robert's contribution to the development process was recognized with a Special Innovation Award from the Department of Veterans Affairs. As Robert's vision continued to deteriorate, he made the difficult decision to step back from his day-to-day responsibilities at the foundation and focus on mentoring the next generation of veteran advocates. He worked closely with Miguel and other young leaders to ensure that the foundation's programs would continue growing and evolving even without his direct involvement. Robert understood that true leadership meant preparing others to carry forward the mission rather than trying to maintain personal control indefinitely. The transition was emotionally challenging for Robert, who had been accustomed to hands-on involvement in every aspect of the foundation's work. However, he discovered that his new role as elder statesman and strategic advisor was equally fulfilling and perhaps even more important than his previous direct service activities. Robert's wisdom and experience provided crucial guidance for complex decisions, and his presence continued to inspire staff members and volunteers throughout the organization. During this transition period, Robert was approached by a publisher who wanted to help him write his autobiography. The publisher explained that Robert's story had the potential to inspire millions of readers and could serve as a blueprint for anyone seeking to create positive change in their communities. Robert was initially reluctant to focus attention on his personal achievements, but Miguel and other colleagues convinced him that sharing his story could extend his impact far beyond the veteran community. The process of writing his autobiography forced Robert to reflect deeply on the experiences that had shaped his character and influenced his approach to service. He realized that many of the lessons he had learned were applicable to people facing any type of adversity or challenge. The book would not just be about veteran affairs, but about the universal principles of resilience, determination, and compassionate service that could guide anyone through difficult times. Working with a professional ghostwriter, Robert began documenting not just the major events of his life, but also the smaller moments of decision and reflection that had determined his path. He spoke about his childhood experiences with discrimination and how they had taught him to empathize with others who faced prejudice. He described his military training and how it had instilled discipline and systematic thinking that served him throughout his civilian career. The book also explored Robert's philosophy of service and his belief that everyone had an obligation to help others whenever possible. Robert explained that he had never set out to become a famous advocate or to receive recognition for his work. Instead, he had simply tried to respond to each situation with integrity and compassion, allowing one act of service to lead naturally to the next. This organic approach to creating change had proved more effective than any strategic plan could have been. One of the most powerful chapters in the book dealt with Robert's experience at Diamond Auto Repair and how that moment of discrimination had catalyzed his transformation from quiet volunteer to public advocate. Robert wrote honestly about the pain and humiliation he had felt, but also about his decision to use that negative experience as motivation for positive change. He emphasized that setbacks and injustices could become sources of strength when approached with the right mindset and supported by a commitment to helping others avoid similar experiences. The autobiography also included extensive discussion of the veterans Robert had worked with over the years and the lessons he had learned from each relationship. He wrote about Miguel's courage in overcoming his physical disabilities and his evolution into a confident leader. He described James's journey from despair to technological innovation and Lisa's transformation from trauma victim to healing professional. Each story illustrated different aspects of the recovery process and demonstrated the incredible resilience of the human spirit when properly supported. Robert's book was published on Veterans Day and immediately became a bestseller, with proceeds donated to the Chen Foundation and other veteran support organizations. The book tour took Robert to cities across the country, where he spoke to packed auditoriums about the importance of service and the potential for individual actions to create lasting change. Despite his vision problems, Robert was able to deliver powerful presentations using audio prompts and his remarkable memory for detail and emotion. One of the most memorable stops on the book tour was a return visit to San Francisco, where Robert spoke at the same high school he had attended as a prophy teenager. The auditorium was filled with students from diverse backgrounds, many of whom came from immigrant families similar to Robert's own. Robert spoke about the opportunities that America had provided for his family and the responsibility that came with those opportunities. He challenged the students to think about how they could use their education and talents to serve others and make their communities better places to live. The response from the high school students was overwhelming, with many expressing interest in military service or volunteer work with veteran organizations. Several students approached Robert after his presentation to thank him for showing them that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things through dedication and service. The visit reminded Robert that his influence extended far beyond the veteran community and that his story could inspire people from all backgrounds to pursue lives of meaning and service. The success of Robert's autobiography led to invitations to speak at universities' corporate events and international conferences about leadership and social change. Robert's presentations always emphasized practical strategies for creating positive change rather than abstract theories or motivational platitudes. He shared specific examples of how small actions could grow into large movements and how individual commitment could overcome institutional barriers and resistance. At one particularly influential conference, Robert spoke to an audience of business leaders about the importance of treating all customers and employees with dignity and respect. He used his experience at Diamond Auto Repair as a case study in how poor customer service could damage a business while excellent service could create loyal customers and positive word-of-mouth advertising. The presentation led several major corporations to revise their customer service training programs and adopt new policies designed to prevent discrimination against elderly, minority, and veteran customers. Robert's speaking engagements also included presentations to medical professionals about innovative approaches to rehabilitation and trauma treatment. The Chen method had continued to evolve and expand with new research validating its effectiveness for treating various types of physical and emotional trauma. Robert's presentations helped train hundreds of therapists and counselors in the principles and techniques that had proved so successful with veteran populations. As Robert entered his mid-80s, his health began to decline more noticeably. But his mental acuity and passion for service remained strong. He made the decision to establish a permanent endowment that would ensure the continuation of his work regardless of his personal circumstances. The endowment was funded through donations from the thousands of people whose lives had been touched by Robert's advocacy and would provide ongoing support for veteran programs, adaptive technology research, and emergency assistance services. Endowment also established an annual Robert Chen Award for Excellence in Veteran Service that would recognize individuals and organizations that demonstrated outstanding commitment to helping veterans transition to civilian life. The award came with a substantial cash prize that recipients could use to expand their own programs and services. The first award ceremony was held at the Veterans Hospital where Robert had begun his volunteer work and attracted attendees from across the country. Miguel was the natural choice to receive the first Robert Chen Award in recognition of his transformation from patient to leader and his ongoing work as executive director of the foundation. During his acceptance speech, Miguel spoke emotionally about how Robert's mentorship had not only saved his life, but had given him a purpose and mission that brought meaning to every day. He pledged to continue expanding Robert's legacy and to ensure that future generations of veterans would benefit from the programs and policies that Robert had worked so hard to establish. The awards ceremony also featured presentations from several international organizations that were implementing Robert's methods in their own countries. Representatives from veteran affairs departments in Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom described how they were adapting the Chen method and the Veterans Honor Initiative to serve their own veteran populations. The international expansion of Robert's work demonstrated that the principles of compassionate service and systematic problem-solving transcended cultural and national boundaries. As the ceremony concluded, Robert was invited to deliver closing remarks that would serve as both a summary of his life's work and a challenge to future generations of veteran advocates. Standing before an audience that included many of the people whose lives he had helped transform, Robert spoke about the continuing need for innovation, compassion, and dedication in serving those who had sacrificed for their countries. He reminded the audience that the work was far from finished and that each person present had a role to play in ensuring that veterans received the respect, support, and opportunities they deserved. Robert's final public appearance was both a celebration of past achievements and a call to action for future service. His words resonated with an audience that understood firsthand the power of individual commitment to create positive change. and the importance of continuing the work even when the original leaders were no longer able to participate actively. The legacy Robert had built would continue growing and evolving, guided by the principles he had established and the example he had set through decades of selfless service. In the months following Robert's final public appearance, a new and unexpected chapter began to unfold in his remarkable story. Despite his advancing age and declining health, Robert discovered that retirement from active public speaking did not mean retirement from making a difference. Through modern technology and the dedicated support of the foundation team, Robert found innovative ways to continue mentoring veterans and expanding his influence around the world. The breakthrough came when Miguel suggested creating a series of video conferences that would allow Robert to mentor veterans remotely using adaptive technology designed for people with vision impairment. The system used high-quality audio equipment and tactile feedback devices that enabled Robert to conduct detailed conversations about mechanical problems, emotional challenges, and career development without needing to see his mentees clearly. The technology transformed Robert's apartment into a virtual counseling center that could reach veterans anywhere in the world. The first remote mentoring session was conducted with a group of veterans in rural Alaska who had been struggling to access mental health services due to their remote location. The veterans had heard about Robert's work and had specifically requested the opportunity to participate in his programs despite the geographical barriers. Using satellite internet and specialized communication equipment, Robert was able to conduct a 2-hour session that included both group discussion and individual counseling. The success of the Alaska session led to requests from veterans in dozens of other remote locations, including military bases in foreign countries, rural communities throughout the United States, and even veterans living in other nations who had heard about Robert's methods through international military networks. The virtual mentoring program expanded rapidly, with volunteers helping to coordinate sessions and provide technical support for participants who were unfamiliar with the communication technology. One of the most impactful remote mentoring relationships developed between Robert and a young veteran named David, who was stationed at a research base in Antarctica. David had been struggling with severe depression and isolation exacerbated by the extreme conditions and limited social interaction at the Polar Research Station. The base commander had learned about Robert's work and had arranged for David to participate in weekly video conferences as part of his mental health treatment. The unique challenges of David's situation required Robert to adapt his mentoring techniques in creative ways. Traditional mechanical therapy was impossible in the Antarctic environment, but Robert developed alternative approaches that used the scientific equipment and research projects available at the base. David began applying Robert's systematic problem-solving methods to his research work and found that the discipline and focus required for scientific analysis helped him manage his emotional challenges. Over several months of weekly sessions, David's mental health improved dramatically, and he began contributing innovative ideas to the research team's projects. His supervisors were amazed by his transformation from a withdrawn and struggling team member to one of their most productive and creative researchers. David credited Robert's mentoring with not only saving his career, but potentially saving his life during one of the most challenging periods he had ever faced. The success of the remote mentoring program attracted attention from military leaders who were looking for innovative ways to provide mental health support to troops deployed in isolated or dangerous locations. The Department of Defense contracted with the Chen Foundation to expand the virtual mentoring program and train additional counselors in Robert's methods. The program was implemented at military bases around the world and became a crucial component of the military's suicide prevention and mental health initiatives. Robert also began working with technology companies to develop new applications and devices specifically designed for remote veteran counseling. His input was valuable because he understood both the technical requirements and the emotional needs of the veterans who would be using the systems. The collaboration resulted in several breakthrough innovations, including voice recognition, software that could detect signs of emotional distress, and mobile applications that provided instant access to counseling resources. One of the most successful innovations was a virtual reality system that allowed veterans to practice social interactions and job interviews in safe simulated environments. The system was particularly helpful for veterans with PTSD or social anxiety, who found face-to-face interactions overwhelming. Veterans could build confidence and develop skills gradually while receiving real-time feedback and coaching from trained counselors. The technology was eventually adapted for use by civilians with social anxiety and autism spectrum disorders, expanding its impact far beyond the veteran community. As Robert's virtual mentoring program continued to grow, he began receiving requests from unexpected sources, including college students who were struggling with academic pressure, young entrepreneurs who needed business mentoring, and even elderly people who were dealing with health challenges and social isolation. Robert realized that the principles and techniques he had developed for helping veterans were applicable to many different types of personal and professional challenges. The expansion into civilian mentoring led to the creation of the Chen Institute for Life Transitions, a broader organization that provided support and guidance for people facing major life changes. The Institute offered programs for military to civilian transition, career changes, health crises, relationship difficulties, and retirement planning. Robert served as the Institute's chief advisor and helped train counselors in his systematic approach to problem solving and emotional support. One of the Institute's most successful programs focused on helping older adults adapt to technological changes and maintain their independence as they aged. Robert's own experience with vision loss and adaptive technology made him particularly effective at mentoring seniors who were intimidated by computers, smartphones, and other modern devices. The program paired tech-savvy young volunteers with older adults who needed assistance creating intergenerational relationships that benefited both participants. The intergenerational mentoring program produced remarkable results, with many older participants developing unexpected expertise in areas like social media, online banking, and video communication. Some seniors became so proficient that they began teaching technology classes for their peers at community centers and senior living facilities. The program demonstrated that learning and growth were possible at any age when proper support and encouragement were provided. Robert's work with civilian populations also led to partnerships with major corporations that wanted to improve their employee assistance programs and customer service training. Companies that had implemented Robert's principles reported significant improvements in employee satisfaction, customer loyalty, and overall business performance. The practical applications of Robert's methods extended far beyond their original military context and proved valuable in virtually any situation where people needed to overcome challenges and work together effectively. One particularly innovative corporate partnership involved a major airline that wanted to improve how their employees treated elderly and disabled passengers. The airline had experienced several public relations disasters involving poor treatment of vulnerable customers and was looking for comprehensive solutions to prevent future incidents. Robert worked with the airline's training department to develop new protocols and educational programs that emphasize dignity, respect, and proactive assistance for passengers with special needs. The airline training program became a model for the entire industry, with other carriers adopting similar approaches and the International Air Transport Association recommending Robert's methods as best practices for passenger service. The program's success demonstrated that the lessons learned from Robert's experience at Diamond Auto Repair had evolved into practical solutions that could prevent similar incidents and create positive experiences for millions of travelers. Robert's influence also extended into the field of education, where his methods were adapted to help students with learning disabilities, emotional challenges, and behavioral problems. Teachers and counselors found that Robert's systematic approach to breaking down complex problems into manageable components was highly effective for helping struggling students develop confidence and academic skills. The educational applications of Robert's work led to new research on innovative teaching methods and therapeutic interventions. One of the most inspiring educational success stories involved a high school student named Maria who had been failing most of her classes due to severe anxiety and learning difficulties. Maria's counselor had learned about Robert's methods at a professional development conference and decided to try applying his techniques to help Maria overcome her academic challenges. The approach involved breaking down each subject into small, achievable goals and providing consistent encouragement and support as Maria worked toward those goals. Within a semester, Maria's grades had improved dramatically and her anxiety had decreased significantly. More importantly, Maria had developed problem-solving skills and self-confidence that extended far beyond her academic work. She began helping other struggling students and eventually became a peer tutor and student mentor. Maria's transformation demonstrated that Robert's methods could be effective with young people facing very different challenges from those encountered by military veterans. The success of these diverse applications of Robert's work led to increased academic interest in his methods and their theoretical foundations. Universities began offering courses on the Chen method and conducting research on its effectiveness across different populations and contexts. Robert was invited to serve as a visiting scholar at several institutions where he worked with researchers to document and refine his approaches. The academic research validated many of Robert's intuitive insights about human psychology and motivation, while also identifying new applications and improvements to his methods. The research findings were published in peer-reviewed journals and presented at professional conferences, spreading Robert's influence throughout the academic and professional communities. The scientific validation of his work provided additional credibility and led to even broader adoption of his techniques. As Robert approached his 85th birthday, he reflected on the unexpected directions his life had taken since that difficult morning at Diamond Auto Repair. What had begun as a moment of personal humiliation had evolved into a global movement that was helping people from all walks of life overcome challenges and achieve their potential. Robert understood that his individual experience had been transformed into something much larger because he had chosen to use his pain as motivation for positive change, rather than allowing it to create bitterness or withdrawal. The virtual mentoring program had grown to include thousands of participants from dozens of countries, with sessions conducted in multiple languages and adapted to different cultural contexts. Robert's apartment had become the nerve center of an international network of counselors, mentors, and volunteers who were carrying forward his mission of service and support. The technology that enabled this global reach would have been unimaginable when Robert first started volunteering at the Veterans Hospital, but it had made possible a level of impact that exceeded his wildest dreams. Miguel had evolved into a respected leader in his own right, serving not only as executive director of the Chen Foundation, but also as a sought-after speaker and consultant on veteran affairs and disability rights. His own transformation from injured soldier to accomplished professional continued to inspire others and demonstrated the long-term effectiveness of Robert's mentoring methods. Miguel often spoke about how Robert's influence had shaped not just his recovery, but his entire approach to life and leadership. The relationship between Robert and Miguel had also evolved into something resembling a father-son bond that provided emotional support and continuity for both men. Miguel's presence ensured that Robert would never lack for companionship or assistance, while Robert's wisdom and experience provided guidance for Miguel's professional and personal development. Their partnership represented the best aspects of intergenerational mentoring and mutual support. As Robert's 85th birthday approached, the foundation team began planning another celebration that would recognize not just his personal achievements, but the global impact of the movement. he had started. The event would include virtual participation from mentees and colleagues around the world, creating a truly international celebration of service and achievement. The planning process itself demonstrated how Robert's work had created lasting networks of relationships and mutual support that extended far beyond any single program or organization. The birthday celebration would also serve as an opportunity to announce new initiatives and expansions of Robert's work, including partnerships with international organizations and the establishment of Chen method training centers in developing countries. These expansions would ensure that Robert's influence continued growing, even as his personal involvement necessarily decreased due to age and health considerations. Robert looked forward to the celebration as an opportunity to see many of the people whose lives he had touched over the years, and to witness the continuing evolution of work that had begun with his simple commitment to helping one wounded veteran learn to walk again. The journey from that first meeting with Miguel to a global movement affecting millions of lives demonstrated the incredible power of individual commitment when guided by principles of service, sacrifice, and compassion. The approaching celebration also represented a transition point where Robert would officially step back from day-to-day involvement in the Foundation's operations while remaining available as a senior advisor and mentor. This transition had been carefully planned to ensure continuity of leadership and mission, while allowing Robert to focus on his health and personal relationships during his remaining years. The careful succession planning reflected Robert's military training and his understanding that successful organizations must be able to function effectively regardless of changes in individual leadership. Looking back on his remarkable journey, Robert felt profound gratitude for the opportunities he had been given to serve others and create positive change in the world. The discrimination and humiliation he had experienced at Diamond Auto Repair now seemed like a distant memory, overshadowed by decades of meaningful work and lasting relationships. Robert understood that every challenge and setback had served a purpose in preparing him for the contributions he was meant to make and in shaping the character that enabled him to persist through difficulties and opposition. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from U.S.